December 31st, 2000. Across Japan, families were preparing to welcome the new year. It's a night of tradition, homes decorated, food shared, the promise of a fresh start. But in Tokyo's Setagaya ward, that night would become something else entirely. When Yasuko Miyazawa didn't answer her phone, her mother, Haruko, grew uneasy. She walked next door, used her spare key, and stepped inside. What she found was not the home she expected. It wasn't a home at all. It was a butcher shop. The entire family was dead, slaughtered in the most horrific way imaginable. In that moment, a grandmother didn't just lose her family. She walked into the crime scene that would haunt Japan for more than 2 decades, because the person who did it disappeared without a trace. More than 250,000 investigators chased this one man. A 20 million yen bounty was put on his head. And still, the killer was never found. That's why in Japan, he is remembered only as the Faceless Man. So what really happened inside that house? And how could the Faceless Man leave behind everything except his name? This is the case of the Setagaya family murders, one of the most mysterious crimes in Japan's history, a nightmare that refuses to die. To understand how this nightmare unfolded, we have to go back to the family at the center of it all. The Miyazawas lived in Setagaya, a quiet neighborhood on the western edge of Tokyo. Their home sat right beside Soshigaya Park, which was a peaceful backdrop of trees and playgrounds. It was the kind of place where kids played, families walked their dogs, and neighbors felt safe. But that park, with its open paths and shadowed corners, was also an easy entrance for anyone to slip into the few houses that stood nearby. Their home backed directly onto the park. In the daytime, that might have felt like a luxury. A stretch of green, open space, laughter of children drifting through the air. But at night, it was different. The park turned into an empty void. No lights, no cameras, no one watching. A place where anyone could approach unseen. And the Miyazawa's house made it even easier. The only barrier between their backyard and the park was a low fence, so small that even a child could climb over it. Their bathroom window on the second floor opened toward the park, with nothing but an air conditioning unit and a flimsy screen between them and the outside. Later, investigators would believe this was the very path the killer took, scaling the fence, stepping on the AC box, and slipping inside. The location itself carried its own risks. On one side, the Sengawa River. On another, empty land. A few scattered houses stood in the area, but it wasn't crowded. There were no shops, no late-night traffic, no security cameras. At night, the place was still, silent, perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. Now, apart from that, in that particular area, nothing had ever happened there before. This was a quiet pocket of Tokyo, far from crime and chaos. The Miyazawas weren't careless. They were simply unprepared. They didn't live with alarms, heavy locks, or barred windows. They lived in peace, and peace has a way of making you feel safe, even when danger is closer than you think. Inside that house were 4 lives. Mikio Miyazawa, 44 years old, worked for a marketing company. His wife Yasuko, 41, was a teacher. Their children, Nina and Rei, were only 8 and 6. Nina was bright and lively, already a year ahead in school, with a passion for ballet that made her grandmother smile. Rei lived with a disability, but his family loved him fiercely, surrounding him with care. Beside their home, in a neighboring house, lived Yasuko's mother, Haruko. The families were tightly connected. Each morning, Haruko called her daughter through the landline, checking in on the household. Their bond was constant, a thread tying the two homes together. It was a closeness that made the next morning even more horrifying. Because on December 30th, 2000, the Miyazawas were simply living their lives, shopping during the day, eating dinner together, watching television, a family of 4 in a home that looked safe, in a neighborhood where crime felt impossible. Their windows weren't reinforced, their doors weren't barricaded, and their fence wasn't built to keep anyone out. But that's the thing about safety, it's fragile. All it takes is one shadow slipping out of the park, one stranger deciding that this ordinary family would never see the new year. And while the Miyazawas went to bed that night, unaware, the stage was already set. Their house was more than a home. It was a trap waiting to be entered. Because the truth was simple. Their home wasn't protected. It was exposed. And in a matter of hours, it would no longer be remembered for peace and family, but for blood and horror. December 30th, 2000 was supposed to be an ordinary night inside the Miyazawa home. The family had been out shopping earlier in the day, then came back to their house in Setagaya. Right beside the park, they ate dinner, spent time together, and settled into their routines. The children, Nina and Rei, went to bed. Mikyo worked late at the computer on the first floor. Yasuko prepared things upstairs for the night. It was calm. It was safe. At least, that's what they believed. But not long before midnight, something shifted. A mysterious person moved through the park behind their house, stepping over the low fence, climbing up onto the air conditioning unit, and slipping in through the bathroom window on the second floor. The screen had been cut. The shadows had found a way inside. The first room off that window belonged to 6-year-old Rei. He was asleep, small and defenseless, unaware that a stranger had entered his home. We will never know exactly what happened in that room, but what we do know is that Rei was the first to die. The killer suffocated him with his bare hands, pressing down until the boy's breathing stopped. It was quiet, it was quick, and it was merciless. Downstairs, Mikio was still at his computer. Maybe he heard a faint thump from the bedroom above. Maybe he thought Rei had rolled out of bed or was bouncing on the mattress. Whatever the reason, he left his desk and climbed the stairs to check. That single decision put him face to face with the intruder. The two clashed violently in the hallway. Mikio fought back hard, injuring the man who had broken into his house. Blood was spilled, but the killer had the advantage of surprise. In his hand was a sashimi knife, a thin, sharp blade meant for slicing fish. It was no weapon for combat, but in that moment, it was enough. He drove the knife into Mikio's head with such force that the blade snapped, leaving a fragment lodged in his skull. Mikio collapsed near the staircase, and his fight cut short. The killer then turned his attention to the two remaining family members upstairs, Yasuko and Nina. It's almost unbearable to imagine what happened next. Yasuko may have tried to shield her daughter, but the killer was relentless. With the broken sashimi knife useless, he grabbed a santoku knife from the family's own kitchen and continued the attack. Both Yasuko and Nina were stabbed repeatedly, far beyond what was necessary to kill. It wasn't just murder, it was overkill. By the time it ended, the mother and daughter lay butchered together, their lives extinguished in a frenzy of violence. And then, everything went still. In a short time span of perhaps 30 minutes, 4 lives were gone. A father, a mother, a daughter, and a son, all wiped out inside their own home. But the most chilling part of this story is what happened after. because the killer didn't run. He didn't flee into the night like most murderers would. Instead, he stayed in their house. Inside the house, he lingered for hours. He checked their refrigerator, pulling out bottles of barley tea, eating melon, and tearing open 4 cups of ice cream with his hands. He sat down at the family computer and went online around 1:18 a.m., browsing as if this house already belonged to him. He used their bathroom, leaving the toilet unflushed. He even treated his own injuries with their first aid kit, carefully bandaging cuts that bled onto the floor. The house, once filled with family life, became a strange mix of slaughter and routine. Blood soaked the floors, but papers were pulled from drawers and tossed into the bathtub. Some money was taken, but not all of it. It was chaos without logic, as though the man had no clear reason for what he was doing or simply didn't care. What he left behind was even stranger. A hip bag, a jacket, a shirt, a scarf, gloves, 2 handkerchiefs. Items that belonged to him were all scattered across the crime scene, along with his fingerprints, along with his blood, along with his DNA. He left behind everything but his identity. At some point, before the morning light, the killer slipped back out. Whether he climbed back through the window or walked through the front door, no one knows. But by the time the sun rose on December 31st, the house in Setagaya was silent, its family gone, its rooms soaked in blood, and its walls hiding the echoes of a stranger who had spent the night inside. What's most unsettling is how ordinary the Miyazawa's evening had been before it turned into a nightmare. A family sitting down for dinner, children tucked into bed, a father working on his computer. All of it shattered in less than an hour, leaving behind only questions that have never been answered. Because December 30th was not just the night of a murder. It was the moment a faceless ghost was born. A man who killed an entire family, left his blood, his fingerprints, and even his clothes behind, and yet somehow walked away into the dark without ever being found. And that's the mystery that still haunts Japan today. The sun rose on December 31st, 2000, marking the final day of the year. Across Japan, families prepared for celebrations, food being laid out, decorations hung, and homes filled with the excitement of the coming new year. But just next to Soshigaya Park in Setagaya, a silence hung heavy over one particular house. A silence that would soon be broken by a grandmother's worst nightmare. That morning, Haruko, Yasuko's mother, tried calling her daughters home, as she did every day. Their houses stood right next to each other, connected not only by a landline, but by a close bond. The call should have been routine, but the phone never rang through. The line was dead. At first, it might have seemed like a small inconvenience. Maybe the cord was loose. Maybe the service was out. Still, something gnawed at her. This was unusual. Haruko decided to check in herself. She walked next door, expecting to be greeted by her daughter or grandchildren. When no one answered her knock, the unease grew heavier. She used her spare key, turned the lock, and stepped inside. The house should have been filled with life. The sound of children's voices, the smell of breakfast, the bustle of a family beginning the day. Instead, it was quiet. Too quiet. As she entered the hallway, a shape caught her eye near the stairs. At first, she may have thought Mikio had fallen, perhaps fainted or slipped, but as she stepped closer, the truth became clear. He wasn't moving. His body was twisted at the bottom of the staircase, his clothes soaked in blood, stab wounds covering him. Haruko's heart must have pounded as the shock hit her. Her son-in-law was gone, but she couldn't stop there. Driven by fear and desperation, she climbed the stairs, calling out for Yasuko, for the children, for anyone to answer. Upstairs, the nightmare deepened. In one of the rooms, she found her daughter Yasuko and granddaughter Nina. They were lifeless, their bodies cut and stabbed so brutally that the sight must have been unbearable. Haruko reached for them, touching them, still hoping there might be some trace of warmth left, some sign of life. But there was none. Both had been taken in a frenzy of violence. Then came the smallest room, the one that belonged to 6-year-old Rei. Haruko entered and saw her grandson still lying in his bed. For a brief second, perhaps, she could have thought he was only sleeping, untouched by the horror in the rest of the house. But as she came closer, the truth was undeniable. His small body was still, his chest no longer rising. Rei had been strangled in his sleep, robbed of even the chance to wake up. The weight of what she had seen must have crushed her in that moment. Within minutes, Haruko had lost her entire family, her daughter, her grandchildren, her son-in-law. A home that had been filled with warmth just the night before now stood drenched in blood and silence. Somehow, in the middle of that devastation, Haruko managed to act. She ran from the house, her clothes marked with the blood of her family, and called for help. When police and investigators finally arrived, they stepped into a crime scene that was unlike anything they had encountered. Everywhere they looked, the house told the story of violence and intrusion. Blood stained the walls and floors. Drawers were pulled open, papers thrown about, belongings scattered as if by a storm. And throughout the house were traces of someone who had not only killed but lingered. Clothes, bags, gloves, and the killer's own blood. Yet, standing in the middle of it all, one fact stood out above everything. The killer was gone. Whoever had turned this home into a slaughterhouse had vanished, leaving behind only chaos and questions. For Haruko, the shock never faded. She had gone next door expecting to hear her daughter's voice and found instead the silence of death. She had touched her daughter and granddaughter, hoping to feel warmth but finding only cold. She had seen her grandson lying as if asleep, but knew he would never wake again. Those images would stay with her forever, the final memory of a family that had been taken in the most brutal way possible. And for Japan, the discovery of their Miyazawa family marked the beginning of a mystery that would not end. Her grandmother's instinct had opened the door to one of the most haunting cases in the country's history. A home that had once been ordinary was now a landmark of horror, a place where 4 lives ended and a faceless ghost began his legend. The house would never be lived in again. From that day forward, it would stand as a crime scene, a reminder of what Haruko had walked into, and of the killer who walked away unseen. What makes this case even more disturbing is not just the murders themselves, but what came after. Because the killer didn't leave. He stayed inside that house, surrounded by the bodies of the family he had just destroyed. Hours slipped by as if he had nowhere else to go. He walked freely through the rooms, leaving traces of his presence in ways that defy reason. In the bathroom, he used the toilet, but never flushed. His feces remained there. A grotesque reminder that this intruder was comfortable enough to leave behind something so intimate, so careless, in the middle of a crime scene. In the kitchen, he raided the refrigerator. He ate 4 ice creams, tearing the cups apart with his hands, squeezing them until they burst. He drank bottles of barley tea, cut and eat a melon, and helped himself as though he were in his own home. The refrigerator became proof that this wasn't a quick escape. This was someone who had time and the arrogance to act like a guest, rather than a fugitive. On the family computer, a login was recorded at 1:18 a.m. The killer sat in front of the glowing screen, clicking through as if nothing had happened just meters away. It is chilling to imagine the silence of that room, the house filled with death, and yet the soft hum of the computer marked the killer's casual presence. He ransacked drawers, scattering papers and documents, dumping some into the bathtub as if he was searching for something, or simply toying with the family's belongings. Rooms were turned upside down, but in ways that didn't always make sense. Some money was taken, but not all. It felt less like robbery and more like chaos for its own sake. And then there is the possibility that makes this case even harder to grasp, that he may have lain down on the sofa and slept, a nap, in the middle of carnage, resting under the same roof as the family he had murdered. When he finally left, he didn't take everything with him. Instead, he abandoned parts of himself inside the house: a scarf, a hat, gloves, a hip bag, a jacket, a shirt. Items that once belonged to him were now evidence, scattered across the scene. Along with them were his fingerprints, his DNA, and his blood, traces of his body mixing with those of his victims. And yet, despite leaving behind this mountain of clues, he walked away unseen. That's why this figure is remembered not just as a killer, but as something stranger, a faceless ghost who, for one night, lived among the dead. What followed the discovery of the Miyazawa family was one of the largest investigations Japan had ever seen. Police swarmed the neighborhood, setting up roadblocks, canvassing the area, and knocking on doors. They launched an operation named Operation Roller. Officers went house to house collecting fingerprints from locals, searching for anything that might match the prints left all over the Miyazawa home. And it wasn't just a few detectives working the case. Over the years, nearly 250,000 officers would be assigned to this investigation. More than 12,500 pieces of evidence were collected and catalogued. It was a mountain of clues, or as one report called it, a treasure trove. From blood samples to personal belongings, from sand particles to shoe prints, the killer had left behind more than most criminals ever would. And yet, decades later, his name is still unknown. The most important clue was in the blood. The killer had been injured in his fight with Mikio, leaving traces of himself throughout the house. Tests revealed he was male, blood type A. DNA analysis painted an even stranger picture. His maternal DNA suggested a European lineage, possibly from the Mediterranean or Adriatic. His paternal line, however, traced back to East Asia. Some believed this meant a father of Korean or Chinese heritage and a mother with European ancestry. But it was also possible that the European side was a distant ancestor, a trace carried down over generations. Whatever the truth, the results were so unusual that police reached out internationally, even turning to Interpol. Still, no match has ever been made. The footprints added to the mystery. The prints came from a pair of sneakers manufactured in South Korea. They were sold under the British brand Schlesinger, but the size that marked the floors of the Miyazawa home had never been sold in Japan. Whoever this man was, his shoes didn't belong in that country. Then came the clothing. Among the belongings the killer left behind was a shirt, simple at first glance. But once police traced it, they found only 130 of them had ever been manufactured and sold. Investigators tracked down 12 of the buyers, hoping it would lead to the man who had left his shirt in a house of blood. But the trail went cold. The other owners couldn't account for the killer. 118 shirts remain mysteries. Just like the man himself, the killer had also left behind a hip bag. In its lining, investigators found grains of sand, but not just any sand. Tests revealed two very different origins. Some came from a skate park in Japan, but other particles match sand from halfway across the world, the Nevada desert, more specifically near Edwards Air Force Base in California. What connection could a Tokyo killer have to the deserts of America? Was it a souvenir, a trace from travel, or something far stranger? Piece by piece, the evidence built a picture of a man who seemed less like a criminal and more like a phantom. A ghost with shoes that didn't belong, blood that traced across continents, and belongings scattered like breadcrumbs. And yet, despite every clue, the investigation never found him. Over the years, the police tried everything. Posters were plastered across Tokyo. Campaigns were launched. Memorial visits were made to the house every year. A 20 million yen reward, which is around $200,000, was offered for any information leading to an arrest. And still, no one came forward with the answer. It wasn't for lack of effort. The police sifted through endless leads. Some thought the killer might have been a skater from the park behind the house, angry over noise complaints. Others leaned toward darker theories, a professional killer, a man with military training, someone brought in for reasons hidden from the public. Journalists wrote books, podcasters revisited the case, retired detectives handed out flyers on the street. The evidence was there, sitting in boxes, each piece screaming with detail. But none of it added up to a name. What makes it so haunting is not the absence of clues, but the presence of too many. Most unsolved cases remain mysteries because there is nothing to go on. Here, there is everything. DNA, fingerprints, blood, belongings, even traces of food and feces. And yet, the man remains untouchable. He left himself everywhere, and nowhere at all. As the years dragged on, the image of the faceless man became more than just a nickname. It became the truth. A killer who left behind his body, his blood, his shoes, and his clothes, but never his face. And that is the cruelest irony of all. The police built an investigation on top of a mountain of evidence, mobilized more officers than most countries would in a war, and still the faceless man slipped through their fingers. More than 25 years later, the questions remain unanswered. How can a man leave so much of himself behind and yet still be a ghost? For more than 2 decades, people have tried to answer the same question. Why? Why would someone butcher an entire family, stay in their home, and then vanish into the night? One of the earliest suspicions focused on the skate park behind the Miyazawa home. Mikyo was known to have clashed with skaters who used the area. Some thought he might have argued one too many times, and that the killer was a disgruntled youth who decided to end the dispute in the most violent way possible. The theory fit the nearby park, the young clothes left behind, even the recklessness of the crime. But no skater was ever linked to the evidence. Then came a darker possibility. Investigative journalist Fumiya Ichihashi wrote a book claiming the killer was a former South Korean soldier, hired as a contract killer and referred to only as R. According to his account, the motive was money. Specifically, the large compensation payouts given to families in the neighborhood during the expansion of the park. Ichihashi suggested someone targeted the Miyazawas because they had spoken about this windfall. It sounded cinematic, almost like a spy thriller, and he even claimed to have matched fingerprints, but police dismissed the story outright. If it were true, they said, the killer would already be in custody. Even the simplest details of the case are riddled with contradictions. The point of entry and exit, for instance. The bathroom window theory has long been the favorite, the cut screen, the fence that could be climbed. But Haruko found the front door locked when she discovered the crime. Did the killer slip back out through the window, or did he use a key from inside the house and lock the door behind him? Both possibilities remain open, neither proven. The computer logs added another layer of confusion. At first, police believed the killer had stayed in the house until nearly 10 a.m., logging back into the family's computer just before Haruko arrived. That would mean he stayed among the bodies for almost half a day. But years later, investigators realized the 10 a.m. activity might have been Haruko herself, brushing the mouse by accident as she stumbled through the horror. And so, the theories stack up. Was it money? Was it revenge? Was it a random act by a drifter who disappeared overseas? None of it has ever been confirmed. Every answer slips through the cracks. Every lead ends the same way, in silence. Because when it comes to the Setagaya murders, suspicion is plentiful. But truth, that remains faceless. Himiyazawa House stood for nearly 2 decades as a frozen reminder of what had happened inside. Its windows shuttered, its walls quietly rotting. It became both a landmark of horror and a place people whispered about but avoided. Some wanted it preserved forever as a crime scene, a physical reminder of the tragedy. But the truth was that the building itself had become unstable, on the verge of collapse. Authorities insisted that all the evidence had long since been secured. The house, they said, was only a shell. And so, despite outrage from supporters, the walls came down. But tearing down the house didn't erase the crime. The Setagaya murders never left Japan's collective memory. The story was kept alive by documentaries, by books promising new revelations, and by podcasts like Faceless, which in 2022 revisited every chilling detail. Each retelling only deepened the fascination and the horror, and even now, more than a quarter of a century later, investigators are still assigned to the case. The old police chief, Takeshi Tsuchida, who once lived and breathed this investigation, has long since retired, but a new generation has taken over. Younger detectives like Manabu Ide, determined to solve what their predecessors could not, continue to sift through the same mountain of clues, blood, DNA, footprints, belongings, hoping that somewhere inside it lies the key to a name. For Setsuko, Mikio's mother, the case has never been just a headline or a mystery. Inside her home, she keeps a shrine to her son, her daughter-in-law, and her grandchildren. Toys rest in glass cabinets, photographs stand surrounded by candles. She prays for them, and she waits. Her greatest wish is to see justice before her own time runs out, to know who destroyed her family before she joins them. But the answer has never come. The killer left his DNA. He left his clothes. He left his footprints, his fingerprints, his blood. He left everything, except his face. And more than 25 years later, Tokyo is still haunted by a faceless man no one can name.